Judging by what's happening around us, Russia is also dying economically. You can argue about this for a long time, but when it comes to oil, for example, yes, India has finally refused Russian oil. All of this has an impact. Even Deripaska is getting nervous, and they say the oligarchs have finally started to stir as well. When will China finally abandon Putin? When it becomes beneficial for them?
Never. Why would anyone need to abandon him? Who is China supposed to abandon Putin to? China is an empire, China is the metropolis, and Russia is the colony. Why would they give up their own colony along with their own satrap? He is China's satrap, an agent of China's influence who does everything China commands.
A formal statement issued by the official advisor to the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Mao Ning, she called, actually, I just forgot exactly how to translate it right now. She called for respecting the sovereignty and independence of all countries, including Ukraine. We would like to remind you that as of now, it still hasn't happened. The war has not been called a war. In Ukraine, it was called a crisis. She once again reminded that China's position on the crisis in Ukraine is very clear. From the very first day of the crisis, China has persistently promoted peace, encouraged negotiations, and insisted on a political resolution to the crisis. China's objective and impartial position and the efforts it has made are obvious to everyone, said Mao Ning in response to a question about whether this also applies to Ukraine. China's call to respect the sovereignty of all countries after the events in Venezuela. How would you comment on this?
So I'm commenting on something. The main thing is China's art is the art of deception. The most revered art in China is the art of deception. Commenting on the Chinese only makes things worse. They can say completely opposite things in 5 minutes, or sometimes even faster, just like in Sichuan opera. Remember how they changed masks there? In a split second. There, the red mask is the good guy, the white mask is already the villain. 1 second. So, how does China in general perceive Ukraine? How does it perceive the Baltics? How does it actually perceive Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Russia? Does it view them collectively as the former USSR? And for some reason, many so called analysts absolutely do not understand this. For them, there is no Ukraine and no Russia either. For them, there is only the USSR. And the USSR is done, it's deflated. And of course, the successor to the USSR is China. China is repeating what it couldn't achieve under Mao Zedong when Mao Zedong spent a month in the Soviet Union offering Stalin to take over China and make it one of the republics of the USSR. In other words, this is the USSR's plan. 100%. That's why China will never actually ever really say anything truly meaningful about sovereignty. They can say whatever they want, it's all lies. In different ways, they are physically claiming yes to absorb others into themselves. And the rest of the world is supposed to become a technological colony of China. So, for example, imagine that right now some country like Burkina Faso receives surveillance technology for its population from China. This isn't hypothetical, this is actually happening. That is, China installs cameras, microphones, and computer systems that monitor everything. In other words, Big Brother is watching you. Who will maintain it? Who will be responsible for making changes and upgrading this system in the future? China. So if right now in Burkina Faso there's a guy who has taken power completely illegally and calls himself president and is being embraced by Putin and Xi Jinping, he could lose that power if it becomes unprofitable for China. In other words, someone else could come to power. How can he govern his people? Through cyber surveillance, through cyber tyranny. Who is carrying out this cyber tyranny? China. So the situation is actually very simple. China provides the means to control the people. These are the specialists who set everything up, who pull the strings while he just sits there nominally as the boss, the dictator. And China doesn't care at all. They don't care even if he eats people, as is customary in some parts of Africa. It means nothing to them. The main thing is that he works in China's interests. If he does something wrong, they'll instantly replace him with someone else nearby. There isn't just one person in the ruling elite there. And that's why he won't be able to get rid of them. It's not just the ruling elite, it's the entire ruling class. They won't be able to break free from China. They've all already become, so to speak, complete satraps of China. Even if they try to break free, China might not even have to do anything. They'll simply lose their means of controlling the people. The people will rise up and put someone else in power, and that person will continue working with China again. This idea of technological colonialism spreads very effectively across the world through technology. But Russia and the former USSR countries are somewhat different. Yes, it's kind of a legitimate freeze by China. If anyone thinks, I especially like this one, that China will take the Far East. But why would China do this? Why take just the Far East if it can take everything? What nonsense. That's the Chinese strategy. If you can take everything, don't just take a part. It's just nonsense. Imagine if China takes the Far East, purely hypothetically. Of course, that won't happen, but hypothetically, they take the Far East. Tomorrow, Putin is overthrown and Maltsev takes power. In a few years, Russia becomes a superpower with the most powerful weapons. So what? China will have to fight Russia for the Far East? Why would they? They'd rather take all of Russia. Someone like Maltsev would never become a leader there.
All right. So, what about Taiwan then? Your prediction.
Taiwan is, so to speak, in essence, in fact, an eternal ploy, essentially a Chinese one. People living in Taiwan are Chinese. You have to understand that. And China sees Taiwan as part of China. No matter what they say, the pilots who meet and curse each other out, you're a traitor, you're this and that. In reality, it's all complete nonsense. It's just, you can easily fool the Americans, the Japanese. The Chinese are cunning in this regard. So for China to take back Taiwan, well, just look, simply, let's say the Taiwanese army and the Chinese army. It's like night and day, isn't it? Here you don't even need to do anything at all. Basically, just come over, come and take it. And half of Taiwan, by the way, would actually be happy and glad to become part of China. But China doesn't need it right now. China needs to shout, hold me back, seven of you, we're going to seize Taiwan. And everyone comes running. Take a look at just how many interesting and important agreements China has made with the United States and with everyone else, all based on the promise not to touch Taiwan. Well, just imagine you could simply promise not to touch your left hand. And for that, they'll keep giving you something. Well, that's great. Why not? So people are a bit, they don't quite get how the Chinese operate and, in fact, how China itself works. The fact that Taiwan was considered an enemy during the times of both Chiang Kai shek and Mao Zedong, well, those days are now long gone. There isn't a single person left from that distant era. Today, China fully and openly interacts with Taiwan. The economies are intertwined. In fact, there is no separate economy. Taiwan's economy is, in fact, considered to be the economy of China, or more specifically, of what is often referred to as Greater China. Yes, and in fact, if China had truly wanted to, it could have, a long time ago, signed the same kind of agreement with Taiwan as it did with Hong Kong. There are two, one country, two, there, those, oh Lord, how was it in Hong Kong again? Two systems, right? One country, two systems. Well, is it really two systems in Hong Kong now? It's one Chinese system. The so-called Communist Party is in control of the government. So China doesn't really have to keep its word. They understand this perfectly well. Even the things they've signed, they've never actually followed through on. But Right now, at this time, they're particularly focused on Taiwan in terms of what can be not stirring up trouble in the East, but attacking in the West. That's also a Chinese stratagem to make noise in the East and attack in the West. Well, attack is relative because China doesn't want war. People don't understand one thing. All these so called cartoons that China shows about its weapons are very different from Putin's. They really do have weapons. They're genuinely very strong. China's army is unique. But China has no intention of going to war. China doesn't need war. That's what people don't understand. It presents itself aggressively. Why? In order to get perks, to be feared, and so that no one accidentally starts a war with it. 10 years of peace and China will rule the whole world. The only thing that can stop China is war. And that's why China has to show its aggressiveness, so that under no circumstances could any country, even a small one like Vietnam, potentially bring down China. China's idea of world domination, so it absolutely doesn't need this. In other words, it doesn't want to take risks. Here, aside from the 36 stratagems that everyone knows, there are two more that no one knows about. But they exist, and the Chinese know them. This is the zero stratagem, the one Sun Tzu talked about. To win without fighting. And that's the main thing. When people go on about the art of war and so on, it's really just for show. They travel around. Why? Because they don't want to fight. They don't need war. They conquer the whole world without war. They are actually much more effective in practice without war. And what can stop them? Only war. If there is a war, that's it. Their entire highly efficient and productive economy, as well as all of their advanced technological colonialism, all their cyber tyranny will immediately collapse. And they will cease to be in that exceptional position they are in now. That's why if the Americans want to defeat China, not defeat, but stop it so that it doesn't just devour them sooner or later, America needs a war, but not with America itself. They need to kill with someone else's knife, act through someone else's hands. There were people there who were a bit smarter, not like 7-year-olds in power. They would have long ago helped the partisans in Russia who would have seized power and who would have arranged such a rock and roll for China that China would have no time for world domination. But in America, it's a completely different story. There, it's all about money and golf. And by the way, that's an objective fact. No matter who comes to power there and the other presidents, they're all from the same basket, like Reagan used to say. In other words, they don't understand how the world works. They don't understand where the world is heading. But China understands this. And here's the paradox. You know what it is? It's that China knows that besides this zero sum game, and besides the 36 stratagems, there's a secret, the 37th one. And what is it about? It's that when a leader starts to die out and fade away, he must strike before he coincides with the rise of a new leader. That is, as long as the United States is militarily stronger than China, as long as they haven't met at this point and become equals, as long as they are stronger, in order to win, they must strike. This is the essence of the 37 strategy. The Chinese knew this, but Trump does not. But they are afraid that hypothetically someone might figure it out, someone who comes after Trump. And that's why all issues need to be resolved. No? In other words, to make America great again. Only in quotation marks. Right now, while Trump is in power, the issue of military confrontation with China is not on the table. This is the most important thing for them right now. That's why it's very important for them that Trump attacks Venezuela or gets entangled somewhere else, gets caught up in all of this. And then they can really stir up some proper rock and roll. It's important to them that everyone is at war with America. Some are actually fighting openly, some are waging what could be described as a Cold War, and so on. But they want it to be happening from all sides right now. And Trump is helping with that, with his Greenlands, Canadas, and so on.